Let's try and explore some of this with Leigh Turner, the former British ambassador to Ukraine and also author of Lessons in Diplomacy, Politics, Power and Parties. If only some people over there had read the book, Leigh. Thank you very much for joining us. Am I going mad here, or was Russia seemingly the sort of the white elephant?
I think the elephant in the room, indeed. Quite right. It is extraordinary, isn't it, that we've had a year in which Russia has ceaselessly bombarded Ukraine, has killed tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops and many civilians, and of course tens of thousands of Russian troops have been killed too. And suddenly we're not mentioning Russia so much in this NATO summit document. But I think you've partly given us the answer to this question already, Henry, because although this statement looks softer in Russia, and there is no condemnation of Russia's invasion as there was a year ago, the reason is absolutely obvious. It's President Trump, who's been extraordinarily pro-Russian since he became president in January this year. And that includes, even more extraordinary than this NATO statement, the reluctance of the US to criticize Russia for starting the war. In February, the United States actually voted against a UN resolution criticizing Russia for its invasion, alongside countries like not only Russia, but Belarus, Burkina Faso, North Korea. So I think what we see here is not NATO going soft on Russia, it's NATO trying to get President Trump, with his weirdly pro-Russian views, on board for this joint statement. And there's quite a lot that's good in the joint statement. Happy to talk about that as well.
Yeah, but do you think it is a good look? The optics of these things are often difficult, as you know, but when you have sort of world leaders guffawing with Donald Trump and it all looks very fun and games, and then you have Ukraine on one hand, a country you know, of course, only too well, and I imagine people are watching it and just thinking, well, there's been no discussion about us actually joining NATO. The statement, to all intents and purposes, as you said, doesn't condemn Russia, the invasion. I mean, what do you think the optics look like?
I think the Ukrainians actually are much more worried about what support they're going to get from the EU and the UK and the US than they are about what comes out of this NATO summit. There is good language on Ukraine. I mean, you read it out earlier. They reaffirm their commitments to provide support to Ukraine. They recognize that Ukraine's security contributes to ours. That's very important. And this promise to up the spending on defense is also really important, because why are we doing it? It's not because we think Russia is cuddly and no threat. It's because, exactly, we think that Russia suddenly is posing the biggest threat to UK, European and actually US security that it has done since the end of the Cold War in 1989. So we should be spending more on our security. And it's going to be a really tough battle, Henry, actually, for politicians, whether in the UK and Europe, to persuade people that there's a real threat out there. And I think that's where you're absolutely right. You know, President Trump brings a kind of weird chaos cloud with him everywhere he goes. And we saw those strange images of Rutte, the head of NATO, joking around with Trump. But we've seen how Trump operates with a variety of world leaders, including, of course, President Zelensky of Ukraine himself, who Trump as good as beat up in the Oval Office of the White House. So he's such a mercurial character, Trump, and he is so much under the thumb of Vladimir Putin, it seems, that you really have to work hard to get from him what you want. And I think here they have got what they want from Trump in terms of agreeing that Article 5 still applies. That's the article that says in the NATO treaty that an attack on any country of NATO is an attack on all of them. And getting the US behind that is a great big win for everybody in NATO, and including for Ukraine. So they've got quite a lot of what they wanted from Trump as a result of this. But I agree, the optics are pretty awful.
Do you think Ukraine should be able to join NATO?
I think it should. Unfortunately, there is a great history of countries, including France and Germany in particular, trying not to antagonize Russia throughout the 2000s. And in the year 2008, there was actually a NATO summit in Bucharest in Romania when it was discussed whether or not Ukraine should be allowed to join NATO. And the UK and the US then were in favour of Ukraine joining NATO, but a number of other countries, not stupidly, but with hindsight wrongly, thought that this might antagonise or provoke Russia. And so they kicked it into the long grass where it's remained ever since. And the result of that was not that Russia said, oh, thank you for doing that, we'll leave Ukraine in peace. The result was that Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. So we'll never know what would have happened if Ukraine had been able to join NATO back in 2008. But it's very difficult to see how Ukraine is going to be secure against further Russian invasions, which of course would be very dangerous for UK security, bringing Russia closer to us, unless they have very strong military support. And one way to provide that support would be by allowing Ukraine to join NATO.
You mentioned earlier on two words, one man, Donald Trump, in terms of his involvement with this and his sort of shadow looming over the NATO conference even before he arrived. Do you worry that 3 years into this, over 3 years into this Russian invasion of Ukraine, that we are in danger of becoming fatigued by it, in the sense that you had Donald Trump 1 minute saying, oh, I'll end it on day one. That hasn't happened. People hear about the kit we're sending to Ukraine. Do you worry there's a sense of fatigue that could creep in?
This is where the political leadership I spoke about earlier is so important. We see, of course, as the years go by and not much seems to be happening in Ukraine. Of course, that's not true. There's a massive war going on with maybe 1,000 Russian troops being killed every week, extraordinary numbers. There was an estimate from the British Ministry of Defence a week or so ago saying that they believed 1 million Russian soldiers had been killed and injured in the attack on Ukraine in the last 3 years. So a huge, massive war going on. And what Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, is hoping is that countries like Britain, countries like Germany, France, Italy, and of course the US will get a bit bored with it. You know, they'll say, this has been going on long enough. Let's have peace. Let's give Russia something so that they stop attacking Ukraine. But we mustn't assume that Russian victory is inevitable here. That's what Putin wants people to think. I don't know if you saw these incredible pictures of the Ukrainian drone attacks on the Russian Air Force recently, as far away as Siberia. Ukraine's very much in this fight. Putin's getting pretty desperate. He's having huge military losses. His economy's on the ropes. He hasn't got very many friends. And if the UK and the EU can step up to the plate and help Ukraine, Ukraine can still do very well in this battle, and they can push the Russians out. But it does mean that we have to maintain support for Ukraine over weeks, months, and maybe even years ahead. And that's a tough political ask.
Always good to have you on, Leigh. Thank you for your time. Leigh Turner is the former British ambassador to Ukraine, author of Lessons in Diplomacy, Politics, Power and Parties.